Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we are going to take a look at the last little bit of Neptune and Pisces that we're coming up upon. So we'll look at this from the perspective of how it's playing into some of the developments that we're seeing collectively in the world, personally, and especially where that intersects with matters of belief. This is a really significant period of time where we're able to integrate a lot of how our beliefs have developed and changed, what we can take from the beliefs that we've developed since 2011, and how to put to rest some of them that may not be serving us quite as well. So we'll look at it from that collective perspective. Then we will take this through sign by sign and look at where Neptune has been leading us in years recently and how it is that we are able to integrate a lot of the information, a lot of the paths that it's laid for us. And also what that tells us about the Neptune archetype that we're able to then take with us a better understanding of how that's going to wind up playing out for us in the coming 14 years as Neptune permanently moves into Aries. So let's get some dates out of the way to start with. We're talking about a Neptune which has already moved into Aries once during the spring and summer, and it's going to be doing its retrograde back into Pisces. So it will be back in Pisces from the 22nd of October through to the 26th of January of next year. Because it's going retrograde back into the sign, it will also then station direct. So it will stop going retrograde and will start moving direct on the 11th of December of 2025. And to make clear the previous period of time that we're looking back on, that we're integrating, that we're processing through this period of time, that would be from 2011 approximately until this springtime. So you can see those dates on the screen there. So there's a few different ways of looking at this on a collective level that I think is going to be useful to this general period of time. In the Northern Hemisphere, the autumn and winter that's coming up, where we're pulling back, we're reviewing, we're going within, we're doing a lot of emotional, spiritual healing. This is going to be a major part of that. It's going to have a huge amount to say about that. So that's part of why I want to dig into it on its own. I will just say I did go through the retrograde of Saturn and Neptune together back into Pisces recently. I'll link to that if you're interested in that. But I wanted to emphasize the significance of what Neptune is doing because we've been working with this energy for so long. It's so easy to normalize these big narrative zeitgeist-based kinds of energies, not to mention the paths that it has pulled us along over the past 14 years. So easy to normalize that. But it is a very particular energy that we've been working with, and we can see it if we start to look at it through that lens. So one of the big things here when we're dealing with Neptune is narrative and mythology. What's being mythologized? What is being narrativized? What's the broader cultural, social belief that we're all just kind of running with, that we're all interacting with? So this has impacts on so many different levels, certainly on the geopolitical and political level, on the cultural level, in terms of social movements, in terms of change, even in terms of pop culture, we can see this play out. And so these narratives, mythologies, this all really speaks to matters of belief, and that's what Neptune tends to bring in for us. So Pisces is a very universalizing energy. There's very little in terms of creating or erecting boundaries between different things. Just to say between different belief systems, between different narratives, between different mythologies. And what's interesting is when we look back on this period of time since 2011, particularly in that first decan, which is about the first 10 degrees of Pisces, we did see this relativization of truth, where there was a recognition of many different truths coexisting and existing for different people based on their own perspectives, based on where they're at, based on who they are, based on perhaps their culture or their subculture. And there was this kind of diffusion of belief for a little while. And yet with Neptune and Pisces, there is that deep desire to believe. So people kind of finding their places, finding their philosophies, finding their perspectives on things and where that fits into the broader whole in the first several years after about 2011. But when we look at this, as Neptune has moved further and further through Pisces, and especially as it's gotten to the final degrees of Pisces in the past few years, I think what we've seen more of here is that boundarylessness of Pisces taking the belief system that we have kind of crystallized since about 2011 for, each of us in different groups and different places and so forth, and applying it to others. And then creating this story about good versus evil of those who agree with me on what it is that I believe versus the stories of the evil that is on the other side of that equation. So rather than this Piscean live and let live attitude toward narratives, toward mythologizing, I'm thinking back to also social media around this period of time where there was a lot less censorship and there were a lot of people saying all sorts of different things, and yet it wasn't quite as angry around that period of time, despite the fact that there weren't as many walls and boundaries, and you're allowed to say this, but you're not allowed to say that, based on the kind of ideological orientation of the owners or those in control of whatever social media platform. But the more and more that we kind of spiraled into these kind of different particularized belief systems, it almost became this visceral attachment that wound up being created of needing to hold on to that belief, needing to hold on to that story, that narrative about how the world works and what's right and wrong. And so rather than this kind of diffusion of belief, there becomes then this insistence that everyone must believe like I do, and everyone must live like I do. So there's this development of this kind of mythologizing of the universality of belief, which is in all of history just not really a thing. We can't expect everyone to believe in exactly the same way because people have different experiences, different perspectives on things, etc. And so this winds up spinning into this kind of top-down enforcement of belief. And then people wind up clinging more and more and more. The more that their beliefs do get kind of tenuous with that universalization, that universal application of this is what's right, that's what's wrong, and you're not allowed to belong to any different kind of club or group or whatever and have me still be okay with you. And also, you're not allowed to slip between the cracks of those things. It's this kind of you're either with us or against us illusion of this story that we've been playing out for the past several years at this point. So there's really beautiful aspects to this, of this deep desire to believe. And yet in Pisces, the lack of boundaries there wound up in and of itself becoming kind of an all-encompassing, overbearing kind of a thing. So despite that desire to believe, one of the lessons I definitely feel that we hopefully can take from this is the need to be a bit more discerning, a bit more choosy as well, because of what a lot of us in maybe all different aspects of political spectrums and cultures and things like this, we can get attached to the markers of our belief, those things that we cling on to for fear of potentially being wrong or for fear of potentially being questioned, these kind of ad hominem against other sides, but also then the kind of cult of personality that we can create around specific individuals that are upholding some grand narrative, basically, poster children, and just sweeping aside and dismissing any argument that those poster children or those central figures within a belief system, that they can't do any wrong. There's almost this kind of infallibility on a lot of different sides, really, about leaders. And I really feel like that in particular is going to be super important as we are going into Neptune and Aries. There's another little twist on that cult of personality that can get super out of hand, especially if we're already running with that thread from this Neptune and Pisces period of time. So the extent to which we can do the healthy Piscean detachment from some of these markers that we're going to go through more of those as well, I think the better for us as we move into Neptune and Aries. Along with that detachment, I think that this autumn and winter, and in fact, I've been seeing this play out as a political strategy, which is interesting already. I do feel like this is going to be a period of time where, like, bearing witness to things, allowing for things to unfold, watching and discerning based on what it is that we're seeing without necessarily trying to strong arm control immediate outcomes, recognizing that allowing for things to unfold in ways we might not be the most comfortable with may actually be a decent strategy in order for there to be greater clarification of where some of the fault lines are in our belief system. That's certainly going to be an aspect that we're dealing with, considering we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that is already active, and it's dancing between the cusp here of Pisces and Aries throughout this season, allowing for things to break apart on their own. We don't necessarily need to apply a huge amount of pressure to this. At the very least, that's not what's called for right now, especially when these planets, Saturn and Neptune, they're going to be retrograde at least until December. They'll then station direct, but they're going to take some time to start actually moving forward. And then we get the exact conjunction of them on the 20th of February in the first degree of Aries. That, I think, is when we start to bring our energies a bit more to bear on the newer situation that we're dealing with. I think allowing for things to fray a bit, come apart, allow for those grand narratives to show their cracks without necessarily enforcing that. Because I do feel like if we try to strong arm the situation, that's how we wind up shooting off into a specific kind of direction that reinforces a lot of the kind of control mechanisms that I feel have gotten certainly out of hand since we've had the beginning of the co-presence of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, which was in early 2023. So bearing witness throughout this period of time, I think, is going to be quite significant. So another really positive aspect that I feel has come through with Neptune in Pisces that I do hope that we can continue to run with, and I think that we will, is that if we look back on the period of Neptune in Aquarius, which ran up to 2011, remember the extremes that we went to toward the end of that. Particularly, I'm remembering that this was a major period of time where there was some really extremist scientism and the whole new atheist absolute rejection of any sort of limited perspective on what empirical evidence is, kind of belief systems, which very much were belief systems. These kinds of things that tell us that the way that we feel about things, care, consideration, ethics, love, all of this can just be boiled down to chemical reactions within human beings. This absolute rejection of anything beyond what a very narrow viewpoint of the scientific method would uphold, and that there's no potential for truth or knowledge or understanding beyond that. So again, 2011 is when we switched into that Neptune in Pisces, and I do feel like since that point, there's been so many layers of like minds that have been opened to spiritual, paranormal, unexplained phenomena, to where that breadth of what can be taken as knowledge, what accounts for our experience, what is significant in life. This has really broadened so much throughout this period of time. And I think that that is absolutely wonderful. But then we do also need to look at the other side of that coin in terms of quote unquote truth being completely relative and not needing to be tethered at all to what our eyes can see, what we can witness, what experience does tell us, but rather just how does it make us feel? It's funny because there's actually, I think it was when Neptune was in Aquarius, back when the Colbert Report was on, there was always this term truthiness, where I think that the definition of that was that something along the lines of that what's true is how it makes you feel. It feels true. And so we get a bit of a pre-critique of some of what Neptune and Pisces would go really, really, really far with. And what is it that feels true, that feels right? It's almost always self-affirming. It's almost always affirming of what you already believe. So there's no room for changing one's mind. There's no room for correction. There's no room for evidence, certainly, which is contrary to one's belief or what one wants to believe. much as there is this wonderful aspect of getting back in touch with spirituality, and also, again, the boundaries being kind of broken down, where it's much less a matter of, are you a this denomination or that denomination, but rather there are so many people who just identify as spiritual or open-minded, open to the fact that there seems to be a lot of unexplained aspects of consciousness and experience, and allowing for that to be whatever our experience of that is, just allowing for it to be, not even really needing to try to explain it. I think that can be really wonderful. And I do believe that that, in fact, will actually be helpful even to science and to physics and so on and so forth. It is often these minds that, these very open minds about different options of explanation for phenomena that wind up making really wonderful breakthroughs. So throughout this time, that has really spun into a lot of idealizing, kind of drowning in stories that make us feel better, holding on to, there's this kind of awareness now of the short news cycle where something that is blatantly untrue is definitely going to be proven untrue, is pushed in among a specific group of people, because they will grab onto it and run with it, and then never telling them later, oh, hey, wait, we misinformed you, and there's evidence to that end. So these kinds of things in terms of accepting those stories and not questioning them, not following up, not looking for evidence that is contrary to our own already existing perspective on things, which of course is always really self-affirming. And then that winding up feeding into this kind of unclear viewpoints where with a lot of people, there doesn't seem to be this kind of principle stance. What is it that you really believe? Are you going to apply that across the board? That, I think, is really what has come apart in the latter days of Neptune and Pisces. The ability to maintain such a level of cognitive dissonance where there are rules for thee but not for me. And even at this point now with Neptune dancing back and forth between Aries and Pisces, that this is almost weaponized. And the irony, the sarcasm that has existed, for instance, in certain parts of the internet that a lot of millennials have known about and known not to go around because they are really not good for the spirit. We've seen the popularization, the recognition of the fact that those things exist, where there is this just kind of nihilistic irony that this can wind up running into. And rather than being in this place of belief and just being in one's delusional kind of groups of people and things like this, that we're actually seeing that acted upon in recent times with Neptune having gone into Aries. So this is something that hopefully on a personal level we can uproot as much as possible before we dive into Aries permanently. So very unclear viewpoints, blurred lines between things, so unclear visions, unclear stories, being really just easily manipulable. That's the thing as well, is then it just becomes who's making me feel good at any given moment, and not needing to have any sort of underlying kind of ethical framework. There basically is no belief framework at this point. And that's what's been super frustrating. I certainly have identified with specific sides of issues throughout my whole life. I've been a very political person, and it's been kind of frustrating also looking at quote unquote my own side and seeing some of this as well, where there are rules for thee but not for me, where there's this kind of gotcha attitude or revenge kind of aspect of the political field, not to mention aspects of opportunism among leadership and claiming to have certain beliefs, but then when it comes to personal connections and relationships with other people who are, maybe organizing alongside, that those claimed beliefs don't seem to translate into how you actually behave with other individuals, things like this, where the lines have just become utterly blurred. And this does create a situation where people are just super easily manipulable. Now, one thing I would kind of warn about a little bit as Neptune goes back into Pisces is feeling seduced by a past that never existed. So thinking back to, for instance, 2019, I think a lot of us look back on 2019 and we're like, man, that was so much better. But it was so far from ideal. We were not thrilled in 2019. We were not thrilled in 2015. It's been a very, very long time since, and I don't think that there really ever has been a period of time that has been pretty ideal. We're always working through troubles. Now, are we definitely working through some particularly sharp and distinctive and rough troubles right now? Yes, certainly. But as I've said before, I will keep harping on this. The only way to the other side of that is forward and through. We can't look back for answers to a situation that is truly unique, we haven't really dealt with before. Not to mention looking for solutions in the past that clearly did not fully solve these issues. So we need to look at this from a different kind of a perspective. And I hope that if we can take down some of the myths of universality of experience and perspective, where there's this need to enforce upon everyone the same type of belief, which of course is always very individually self-serving, then hopefully we can move into the Neptune and Aries time frame with an attitude of belief is something that is very individual. And just because someone else holds a belief that is different from mine doesn't mean that it needs to be a risk or a threat to me. So that kind of confidence of your own perspective, your own belief, such that you don't need to enforce it. Now, we're going to struggle with that. But again, I do feel like the higher way, the higher road here, without doing this, holier than thou kind of an attitude toward these things. But that will be the best way that we can run with this personally going forward. And also, I think the least frustrating, because we're never going to be able to enforce our own particular beliefs upon everyone else. Additionally, another aspect of this that I feel has become quite interesting, and I think is going to be shifting and changing as we get Neptune into Aries, is this glamorization of effortlessness, which is an illusion. And we've seen this in the world, and a lot of people have kind of drowned in this a bit. What I'm referring to is this idea of, for instance, passive income. There's all these stories, all these myths, all these narratives around to be a master of this situation, this world that we find ourselves in today. The only way to do that is to develop passive income. And if you're not doing that, then who are you? Well, you might be a useful person to culture, to society. You may actually be a productive person if you're not just relying upon that. And so the glamorization of this, particularly with like influencer culture and things like this, where there's this glamorization of this idea of not having to work. And I'm being careful with my words there, because I don't want to push us to this, oh, we should be glamorizing the kind of situation that Greece is looking at right now, where the government is pushing an increase of the workday to like 12, 13 hours a day. I don't at all want to push us toward that, but the glamorization of that passive income, honestly, illusion and scam that a lot of people, and I think especially a lot of young people, with the coexistence of the kind of nihilism about the direction that the world is going in, that it looks like the world is going in right now. Spoiler alert, it's not actually going in that direction, which is a good thing. But there's that kind of getting sucked into this idea of just being special and just making money because you're you and you're special. And so, for instance, with gaming, that is a thing, and there is some productive benefit that winds up coming out of that and everything. But there's, again, this glamorization of that, and therefore the trouble that a lot, particularly that we've heard of in the news, I'm not trying to gender this, but around young men struggling to motivate to be productive. There's a lack of a value or a desire to contribute to society in the ways that we always have, generally speaking, as populations, which is to say, without actual productive workers, nothing functions, and there's nothing to be glamorized about, or there are no games because there's no internet because we don't have engineers and we don't have the workers who actually lay those lines and maintain them and so on and so forth. The function of society, I feel, has been so devalued, top down, without a doubt. But the nihilism that has creeped in on a lot of different sides has definitely encouraged and reinforced this devaluation of productive work, which of course we can see in the wealth inequality as well. So a lot of young people completely dissociating with this later stage of Neptune and Pisces, losing themselves in this kind of dopamine fueling unreality that is being participated in and that people are really struggling with. And therefore we're seeing real world social impacts now, especially as that funnels into then Neptune and Aries. And some of these kids who are now kind of being confronted on these lines are reacting against, because they've been failed by all of us, really, in making it clear that the critiques of working life, that the critiques around the value of some work, a lot of work, being productive, creating things, and therefore the reaching for other answers, the reaching for quick fixes because people are economically and financially frustrated. That turning into, because it's easier to just say, well, why even do it? What's the point? About the actual work that absolutely needs to be done for society to function, because of the fact that the reward is not commensurate with the effort, and because of the snotty top-down attitude toward a lot of different professions and toward a lot of different paths that traditionally have been followed by maybe young people who don't want to go the academic route, but even that has become so complicated with the financial exploitation of students and things like this, to where now even people who would have followed that path are choosing not to, and they don't really know what to do. So this glamorization of effortlessness, I feel like for those of us who are a bit older, we need to be very responsible about how we address some of these economic wealth inequality, work-based, productivity-based frustrations that we have, to make sure that to the best of our ability, one, we're actually addressing them and not belittling each other as well, based on education levels and things like this, based on income levels, etc. But also just making those critiques clearer and again, really pushing for solutions along those lines, which is to actually address the fact that there are way too many industries that are highly productive, which are incredibly undervalued because of the unreality, because of the funneling of more and more and more and more of a percentage of all of the wealth, not only into these extremely big corporations that become less and less valuable and less actually productive because of the lack of competition, etc., but now into the unreality of AI and these few companies that are sucking more and more and more of investment out of other industries around this time. So we're going to need to address that, but I think it would be good to be as careful as we can about that and not belittle each other in the meantime, and perhaps even try to build each other up, try to build up those industries, that work that has to be done in order for society to function. And that does include service workers and so on, trades and etc., and professors and theorists. Again, these have become weirdly markers and marks, basically, for attacking people ideologically. And I think it's just becoming really unhealthy on a cultural and a social level for us all, certainly, but also especially for young people who are coming into greater consciousness of how the world works during this period of time. There's a lot of crossfire for them to get caught up in, and a lot of them have, because of this utter drowning in these matters of belief and narrative that have pulled so many older generations into this kind of these unnecessary fights over what should be a live and let live kind of a situation, where we can't solve that for everything. We can't enforce a specific kind of belief on everyone. And that is wonderful, because I think a lot of us that are looking at what's going on right now, especially as, again, Neptune is crossing between Aries and Pisces, we're seeing the edges of all of this, really. And we're seeing the attempt to enforce specific belief And I think a lot of us have been able to take some distance from that and look at it and just know it's never going to work. It's never worked. So also that knowing that applies when we try to universalize our own beliefs as well. So just remembering that from the outside of a given perspective, a given quote unquote truth, it does seem clear that people are ignoring reality. Also, for those of us who aren't big time into gaming, for those of us who aren't in, whatever niche little, whatever grouping that we look at from the outside, it becomes very clear, yes, that they are ignoring reality. But in many cases, a lot of people are doing so in their own ways. I think that with Neptune and Pisces in this last little bit, we do need to also really look at our relationships with dopamine, especially the fact that a lot of the serotonin encouraging activities that we typically engage in have been stripped away. So gratitude, appreciation for others, kind of coming together, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of understanding, connectedness to other people. And especially when that is done in a kind of gentle way, really enhances serotonin levels internally. Whereas the doom scrolling and the, getting into fights online and things like this, these are dopamine activities. The gaming is a dopamine activity. And so we all have our own little funky relationships that get healthier and less healthy with those dopamine fueled kind of activities. And we could all certainly look at that and maybe even share our own experiences about how we are working through those things and try to help each other out with that rather than just judging each other. So we are speaking to the anaretic degree, the final degree of Pisces. This is also, therefore, the final degree of the zodiac. Neptune is only going back to 29 degrees, and it's stationing at 29 degrees. So this is likely to be quite loud. We then wind up this station here with Neptune at 29 degrees going direct. That conjunction with Saturn then occurs at the very first degree of the zodiac, which is 0 degrees of Aries. So this is a very, very significant alignment this is why I wanted to come back to it as we're moving more into this period of time. There's a hugely significant opportunity for closure around some belief systems. Again, closure around this universalization of experience or truth, this kind of hyper proselytization, basically, that we've all kind of gotten into, of arguing our viewpoint, which again, remembering always that is self-serving. We're never really arguing, hey, maybe I should give some space. Maybe I should give you some room to be you, right? The more that we can do that, I think the better. Getting some closure around that preaching, holier than thou, the rules for thee, but not for me. Universalization of this is my experience and everyone must recognize it. Does it suck? Genuinely? Is it unjust? Genuinely? That certain perspectives, I don't want to say will never, but probably won't for a very long time, if not ever, for a specific reason that I will also, I'm going to come back to in a moment, will never really be universally recognized or acknowledged. For instance, historical and present suffering and exploitation and things like this, yes. But when that becomes in and of itself a rule that everyone must follow, that is dangerous territory that can be flipped then on its head. And then we get into the whole insane games that we've gotten into with grievance and things like that. Again, I have a side on this. And I certainly believe that things would be really quite ideal if everyone agreed with me on what the real or genuine grievances are. But I feel like that is an issue that Pisces has, is pity. It's also passivity. So not taking agency. And again, these are difficult arguments for me to make, but I do genuinely just feel in my bones this is how we wind up getting through this, is recognizing our agency, recognizing the role that we are able to play in getting ourselves to a much more reasonable state than we were in prior. So again, I genuinely mean it when I'm saying all of us really need to find a space in which we are able to allow for people to disagree. Now, I'll come back to the point of, yeah, I don't think that it's ever just going to be perfect. And in particular, because of the fact that there are certain personalities that just don't, that are genuinely nihilistic and are genuinely opportunistic and genuinely exploitative. And the whole point, I think, ultimately is just not creating a culture and a system which benefits and rewards that kind of behavior just because a given individual claims to agree with us on certain issues. You know, that needs to be, I think, brought down a major notch, if not pretty much all of the notches across the board. That, I think, ultimately is what's underlying this. That, I think, is ultimately the nasty kind of spiritual energy, or I should say just energy in general, that is in this stew, which could be a really beautiful thing as we are opening up, becoming more conscious and things like this. It's going to be really important that we keep that energy in check, which is just utterly self-serving, doesn't have really a genuine belief system that it's relying on, but is just ultimately opportunistic. There's certain words for this that some people are comfortable with, some aren't. Apply the labels that you will. I'm not diagnosing anyone, etc. So ultimately, kind of across the board, taking the time to detach from needing to be right or needing to, quote, win, especially before the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Because for those of us who are in that space, going to get our asses handed to us. If we are in that space of my experience and my knowledge is perfect and my beliefs are perfect, and this is what everyone should need to follow, take it from a Saturn-Neptune conjunction person, that is when you get your ass handed to you. So the extent to which we can step back from that and allow for the higher aspect of Piscean passivity, which is observation, taking things in, absorbing things, recognizing things, watching, seeing how things unfold, and then understanding when the moment is to do something, to pursue something, to create a message, to share a story, to share compassion, to share love, which is what Pisces should be working with. The more that we can get into that frame before we get the exact conjunction of Saturn, Neptune, I think the safer space we create for ourselves to go through basically that vortex of what we believed collectively prior versus what we're about to recognize about what it is that we've believed prior. And the fact that we then need to crystallize a whole new set of schema around frameworks of belief, around principles, around ethics, all of this, around how we relate to each other, certainly. So trying not to step back into passivity as in like a feigned helplessness, but rather to process that, release it for Neptune and Aries, which is also going to kick our rears if we fall too much into that. Neptune and Aries is not going to have really any time for this lack of sticking up for ourselves, lack of belief in ourselves, to take care of ourselves and those around us, and vice versa, but rather stepping back from that need to enforce our own safety based on, I hate to say, illusion of or illusory insistence that everyone must agree. Additionally, just simply looking back over this broader period of time, I think this is going to be a wonderful practice for us, basically, to get us into this mindset of being flexible about and questioning the rigidity of our current beliefs, which is look back all the way to and since 2011. What do we no longer believe in that we did at that point? I think for all of us, there's got to be something. There's definitely some stuff for me as well. And what is no longer satisfying or satiating? I think for a lot of people, it's going to be the drama, the online fighting, the getting into these camps and throwing things at each other. All the crossfire has become beyond exhausting. It seems to come out of nowhere, seems to crop up with every single issue. And I was listening to Dabney Lawless earlier today, and she was mentioning that she had been looking at like cult survivor stories and things like that. And one of the things that she mentioned, which I think is also really pertinent to this period of time as we have Neptune moving in this extremely significant area of the sky here, that when people are coming out of cults, one of the things that they recommend is to not approach that person by reproaching them, by going on the attack, by saying, oh, you're so stupid. You never should have believed that. This is how wrong you were. Because it winds up putting them on the defensive, and it can put them back into that space of retreating back into that kind of cult thing. So depending on whoever you think is in a cult, just trying, again, our best not to attack that, not needing to win. Because the more that we need to win, I truly believe that the less likely that we are to actually come out of this well. If this is going to be a masses versus masses fight, no one ever wins those fights. There is no winner in those fights. So the masses have got to get off each other's backs during this period of time. And if it looks like ceding ground, just recognize that if the belief system of those on the other side are as faulty as we would believe for them to be, depending on whatever side we're on, stepping back from needing to be petty with them will take that defensiveness kind of down a bit. It does help to open minds. It is in that sense of attachment to defense, which is a position that a lot of us have been put in specifically because of the economic situation that is trying to get brushed aside by creating all of these culture wars for all of us to be fighting each other about, rather than dealing with the root cause, which is economic precarity. It is every time. We know this. We've been through this process so many times at this point. We know why these issues wind up coming up. People are feeling a genuine fight or flight response to precarity, and those who benefit from that economic precarity, from that wealth inequality and so forth, know exactly how to sick all of us on each other rather than have us address that issue as we would democratically in a reasonable and a rational way. So the less on the attack of regular people that each side can be, the more likely we are to make it through this more comfortably. I deeply believe that. So on a very personal level, really receiving final directions from Neptune in this Pisces area of our charts as well. So wherever in the houses that Neptune has been for you, as it's been in Pisces, wherever that is in your chart, Neptune does do this very interesting kind of thing where it leads us by serendipity. It leads us through happenstance, through these chance encounters, these weird opportunities that seem to crop up out of nowhere, these strange fascinations that we can't step away from. It leads us down a specific path, I do genuinely believe, with some kind of a destination in mind, but it doesn't do so in this linear, here's the breadcrumb trail to the destination. No, there are so many detours and so many little different paths where we pick up these interesting experiences that wind up enriching our own understanding of ourselves, of our lives, of the way that the universe works, etc. It brings us into a broader range of experience. And it does wind up landing us somewhere. So where have we landed at this point since 2011? What's changed? We're going to want to definitely look at the house that this is playing out in for us, but collectively in Pisces, and when we're dealing with Neptune, which do have a lot of overlapping kinds of elements to it, along the lines of belief and philosophy, spirituality, and so forth. I'm sure we've all had some really wonderful, weird, twisting paths that we've followed along those lines to get to where we are today. But again, house by house, this has been laying a specific path for us to unfold along. So there may be some final experiences that this Neptune is wanting to show us. And the more open that we can be to whatever that's going to be, the more meaning that we can open ourselves up to throughout the season, I think the richer and the better integrated the lessons will wind up being for us, so that we're able to take that forward in a wiser way, basically. This is also going to provide us some closure and greater understanding around how belief and stories we've told ourselves have led us to lessons and experiences about serendipity, about unexplained phenomena, about consciousness, about connectivity, about human history, about culture, etc. But also, again, based on the house where this is, that area of our life as well. So where have you been drawn? Where have you experienced a weird amount of synchronicities since 2011? And what were the lessons? Those are Neptunian lessons, the ones that follow the synchronicities. And especially then narrowing in on what area of life was this playing out in based on the house. So really beautiful opportunity to surrender our grip on belief and allow for the universe to reveal itself for us and also reveal best practices for the next steps. None of us know exactly what the best practice is for the next steps here, but that knowledge exists in consciousness. I personally believe. I won't push my belief on you when it comes to that, but I really feel like there is some higher knowledge here. There is some greater wisdom that we are being led by. And a lot of that elusive, leading kind of energy that is beautiful is Neptune. But there are always pitfalls as well, and we can fall into them here and there, either individually or collectively. And there are often then fundamentally lessons around what is it that you were believing in, which wasn't genuine, which wasn't real, especially with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. It's probably going to punctuating this Neptune and Pisces period of time and punctuating this transit of Neptune through this house of ours. There should be some really poignant lessons that we can pick up on if we allow for ourselves to, again, surrender our grip on what we need for things to have meant, what we need for things to have revealed to us, basically. So this review as well, to really better understand how Neptune will be approaching the Aries parts of our charts. We've gotten a bit of a preview of that over the past season since the 30th of March. So maybe we've gotten little glimpses of that, but there's so much more to unfold. Think about 2011, that April 2011 to April or August of 2011 timeframe, when we got that first little instance of Neptune and Pisces. By August of 2011, did we have the full view, the full picture of what Neptune was going to reveal to us until 2025? I don't think so. So remaining as aware of how Neptune has led us so far and as truthful, as honest, as open, as kind of let it be what it is, higher aspect of Pisces about that we can be. I think the clearer a mind we're going to wind up going into the Neptune and Aries timeframe with, and therefore maybe need less frustrating or challenging lessons along that path that's going to unfold for us. And hopefully an awareness and an ability to recognize the interesting synchronicities, the interesting paths that are going to wind up unfolding for us in that area of our life and in that aspect of our experience, which also I've done a Neptune and Aries video as well, if you are wanting to look forward on that as well. But I'll probably come back to that again in January. I may wind up doing another little Neptune and Aries update. And I think in the meantime, focusing in on just releasing around these narratives, releasing that urge to universalize like Pisces does. Aries is very particular, so we can't really take that with us anyway, and it's really just going to wind up becoming, in a sense, baggage of lessons that need to be learned the Aries way, which I don't think a lot of us wind up preferring. So I think that's pretty much what I have for us for now with this Pisces, Neptune, retrograde period of time. So I hope that this has been helpful, useful. It's been really nice personally taking some time and really like meditating on this Neptune in Pisces energy that we've been dealing with. So I hope that it's also something that other people are quite comfortable with going into this more relaxed stretch of time that will wrap up certainly as we get into next year, a bit more into next year when things are a little bit more clear about the actions that we're going to wind up taking. But this period where we get the outer planets all retrograde and we're able to look back, integrate, release, loosen our grip. I think that this is a really important step that we should try our best not to miss just because it looks a little bit more quiet. But yeah, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. The zodiac signs, the horoscopes are going to be time-stamped. I do definitely recommend checking out your whole sign rising sign. That's what the horoscopes are really designed for. But if you use a quadrant house system and the transit winds up falling into a different house than would apply for your whole sign rising sign, definitely feel free to adjust in order to put it in the correct house. There's graphics, so you should be able to see how that's laying out. And if you want to check for your sun sign, that's absolutely fine too. And yeah, if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps the video to spread around. And do consider subscribing, sticking around for future videos like this. I would love to have you here. And thank you so much as well to the members of the channel for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, Michelle Howell, JJ, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Maria Cyril Hyro, Rachel Windholtz, Aya, The Z-Man 1291, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dali Gizi, Mango JT, B Love, Race, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, On the Road, Jonathan Mason, Chad Wiseman, Ezekiel David LaRosa, Adrian K, Astrology Party, SP, Karen, Teresa Jones, Seda Topkuoglu, Sherry Leas, Horse Dog Notebook, Justice League Pie, Nioke Beam, and Ashley Gonzalez. Thank you all so much. Much love to you. And if you are interested in memberships, there is information in the description box below for that. I think that they are allowing people to join on iOS. That's the most recent news that I've gotten. But usually the join button doesn't show up on the iOS app because of Apple issues with pretty much all apps. But you should be able to at least click that link and join from there if you are interested. And with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Neptune in Pisces, has been in your 12th house and will be shortly again. So this is speaking to matters of your unconscious, of your sense of belief, your especially subconscious beliefs. So around yourself, looking into that, what are the unconscious, subconscious beliefs around your own life, around your own agency that have developed or come apart or shown themselves to you in different ways? Have there been periods of time where you've been thrown into a situation of really needing to like grit through something and figure out how to get yourself to the other side, like on your own, not relying on other people? And what did that tell you about yourself? Or was there a period of time where you were put into a situation where you had to surrender and release control and allow for other people to take care of things, or just leave certain things up to the universe to have them play out as they do? Especially since 2011, looking into that, also reviewing how your spirituality has developed. Has there been this kind of serendipitous or synchronicity lined path for you, spiritually speaking, to get yourself to a specific kind of understanding of the world or perspective on spiritual matters, that which is beyond the veil? So looking at the development of that, there's Neptunian seeds all throughout that. And for one thing, that can just kind of help us to look back on how it is that we got to where we are, but also then looking at that as this is how Neptune works is going to help a lot in terms of understanding what it's doing as it's going into your first house. Also, any sort of illusions around solitude, or again, these kinds of either you have to make it on your own or you can't make it on your own kinds of stories, and the sense of needing to sacrifice either for connections or needing to sacrifice connections with other people. These issues of service, compassion, your connectedness, your deservingness, your, what's the word that I'm looking for? Your worthiness. How has that played in to these notions of solitude and sacrifice since 2011? Maybe you have gotten really comfortable, maybe a little bit too comfortable with notions of suffering And there may be then an avoidant kind of an attitude that winds up coming through with that as a defense mechanism coming from the subconscious about how connecting with things leads to suffering or something along these lines, where then you're stepping away from it, you're avoiding it. And that can be, self-sabotaging is kind of a strong term that I don't love to use, but it can just cut off certain opportunities from you if you are trying to protect yourself in that way. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the responses that has come through during that Neptune and Pisces period of time. But ultimately, this is about integrating those unconscious beliefs, releasing those which aren't serving you, recognizing maybe where you sell yourself a little bit short, or where you try to control things for fear of how things will play out if you don't have that firm grip on things, and how those things then wind up subtly influencing your life. So how does that impact outcomes for you? The way that you approach things subconsciously, just the beliefs that are underneath the surface that are already active before you even think about it, before you even set your mind to, why am I doing something? It's that automatic response is in the 12th house there. And the thing is then, looking at how that's developed, trying to integrate that, trying to make peace with a lot of that, trying to release a lot of that, and recognizing how that works on a subconscious level. This Neptune is now moving directly into your consciousness and into your behavior, into your action, as it's moving into Aries, as it's moving into your first house. And those serendipity, synchronicity kinds of experiences and things like that, they will probably be a lot more obvious and less of an option. Like, it'll probably be something that you feel like, okay, I have to take this opportunity and so forth. But being able to recognize, though, what those look like, just by having looked back on how has Neptune presented itself to me in this more subtle subconscious way as well. Other than that, I would just throw out there that there's likely to be aspects of that spiritual development that you've gone through in recent years that are now becoming more of an overt aspect of your personality, or some kind of wisdom that you're carrying with you that is going to be more active now and going to be more like on the surface, not superficial, but more something that you're just kind of carrying yourself with and that people are recognizing in you as we go into Neptune in Aries. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Aries. Do keep in mind, I did look at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going retrograde as well. So also feel free to check that out. Also, again, feel free to check out the Neptune and Aries video that I've already published, taking that through the houses too. And yeah, I hope this all helps you out. And I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have Neptune in Pisces in your 11th house. And this house has to do with group associations. It has to do with your dreams, aspirations, your role within the community, colleagues, friendships, things like this. So this whole general period of time since 2011 has probably taken you down a lot of paths when it comes to people that you're connected with. There may be certain causes or communities, things like that, that you wound up involving yourself in that you thought was going to kind of be an end in itself, but wound up just kind of introducing you to new things and new paths, new ideas, things like this. So reflecting on a lot of those changes, especially the synchronicities that have taken place where things just kind of happened upon your path when it comes to those group associations, ideals, aspirations, and things like that. Sometimes things just coming through in a shocking way. Like, I didn't think that that would actually wind up happening. I was hoping it would, but this is pretty awesome that I've crossed paths with this person who can help me make it happen, things like that. So then being able to recognize how Neptune has been working on your ideals, it's probably made them much more robust, much more universal, much more compassionate, and more deeply felt, and hopefully not brought up to a point where there's an over identification. I'm trying to be sensitive here, but This can, and I, full disclosure, it's about to move into my 11th house. So I'm also talking to me here ahead of time, but this can get really big and really like the ideals are all that matters. And that's what I'm serving, kind of a thing. It can become very self sacrificial, basically, or even a bit zealous when it comes to beliefs and ideals and things like that. So maybe looking at some of those potential edges there as well. I would also imagine that you've come into some spiritualized communities, be it online or in person, and had some really interesting chance encounters with people who were also very spiritual themselves. Hopefully, not strange experiences with gurus and people like that, but that could also be the case if that has been, that you've run across some a little bit off or deceptive people that you didn't catch right away. Just looking at that as there's a blessing in it. When it's Neptune, there's a blessing in it. It's showing you something, it's teaching you something, even when we get swindled and things like this. There's always a silver lining to it, a lesson or an experience or an understanding or wisdom that we're able to take with us from that. So is there a potential to forgive for your own sake around paths that you've been led down by people who might not have been totally above board? So then that flowing straight into this next matter of reviewing boundaries in friendships, that I would imagine also has become kind of a thing, probably due to periods of time where that has been weakened a bit since 2011, where maybe your boundaries have been crossed too much and probably lines should have been drawn earlier. But again, there are lessons to be drawn from that, which is, of course, when to draw those boundaries. So hopefully through necessity, those have gotten stronger, and perhaps particularly since 2023 when Saturn also joined Neptune there and may have really pointed that out. But yeah, again, these idealized kinds of beliefs, so this kind of universal brotherhood or sisterhood, or these, again, universalized beliefs, they may need refining. So what is your role in that? Like, Neptune in Pisces can be super self-sacrificial, and it can take the whole world on its shoulders. So if you have found yourself in that role, self-imposed, it may be worth sitting with that and then drawing out, like literally writing down, what is it that I can do? And what is it that is definitely too much for me to ask of myself, that is really not my responsibility about this? Because this can be a bit over the top in terms of self-sacrificing. So just kind of something to keep in mind. What is your role in the collective? What do you want it to be? What would it be ideally? What would it be, quote unquote, realistically, as opposed to ideally? And what is it right now? And what are you able to do now with the resources that you have? And what is reasonable, again, to be asking of yourself? Now, as Neptune then is moving into Aries, into your 12th house, looking back on all of this, the paths that Neptune has led you on, and it can show up as specific people, definitely, or groups, communities. Specific, by groups, there's specific way that I want to put that. Causes, like how people rally around a cause or an interest or something. So groups like that, especially. How has meeting them, coming into contact with them, being redirected by them, or being in a leadership position within them, or following along with some of these things, or incorporating yourself with them. Look at how those group dynamics have played out, and also your ideals and your aspirations, your hopes, and how those also wound up playing out, in order to decipher, okay, I can see where the weird little synchronicities are. I can see how there's been this weird little Neptune kind of leading me by the hand and showing me these different opportunities, these different experience broadening kinds of opportunities, basically. That way you can see what Neptune is likely to be doing in your 12th house, which is going to be working even more so on philosophy, spirituality, your vision, your beliefs. And it's working rather than on this overt level influence. The 12th house is still very influential, but it's more subtle. So it's more of like working on the ether and being able to like emanate your beliefs rather than maybe preach them is a little bit more of an 11th house thing. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. Keep in mind that I did do the Saturn Neptune going retrograde into Pisces thing. If you want to dig a little bit more into this alignment here, totally feel free to check that out. I'm quite sure I did a sign by sign on that one. And then I also did do Neptune in Aries. That's also going to go through sign by sign. So check the description for those if you want to look at this from kind of a different angle as well. And other than that, yeah, I hope that this little retrograde of Neptune back across the sign boundary treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Neptune in Pisces doing its last little bit here in your 10th house. And the 10th house has to do with your public reputation, your public standing, your role, your position in the world, basically. So typically this winds up showing up as our profession, our career path, but it's really just our public image and what it is that we are ambitious to achieve with our lives, what we're trying to create with our lives. And the position, the role that we're trying to put ourselves in, basically. So there may be some closure on some illusions along those lines, but I think that this is actually quite interesting and helpful because I would imagine that you've been shown different types of paths that you can take, and you may have even been taken on some detours along the way, along the lines of your profession in since like 2011. And that's wrapping up. Now, I'm sure that that has been wonderful. If you really look under the surface of that, it may have taken you down some paths that you thought were an end in itself, but it turned out it wasn't so. It was just trying to add another arrow to your quiver, basically. It's trying to add another layer to what it is that you understand about your role and your position in the world and what you're wanting for that to be and what your values truly are along those lines. And perhaps with Neptune in Pisces here, how you can kind of best serve. There may have even been moments of major self-sacrifice on a personal level for your career. And it very much worth questioning now, was that sustainable? Did it burn you out? Did it pull too much from you? Who pulled too much from you? Did you wind up developing some pretty strong boundaries in this area out of a sense of necessity since 2011? Maybe there have been some less than completely straightforward people that you've dealt with that offered opportunities that turned out not to be what you thought they were. Those are those little weird detours and paths when we're dealing with Neptune. There is something that we wind up drawing up from that and that we wind up benefiting from that. But sometimes it does require really looking more underneath the surface when we're dealing with that, because there is a lot of disillusionment that winds up going along with that. So a chance to surrender then those outdated ambitions, to release any sort of ideas of our public image that we were holding on to that either very clearly did not pan out because probably then that just was not what was supposed to happen. We were supposed to go in a different kind of a direction that this Neptune would have also wound up leading us toward. And then also those things that don't quite align with our values truly. I would, again, imagine that if there had been weird people, swindlers would be a strong term, but perhaps accurate, along the way, they probably pointed out certain aspects of ambition and achievement that did not truly align with you and did not truly feel right and weren't really the direction that you were supposed to go in. So looking at that, surrendering those things, maybe forgiving at points with regard to that as well. And then, yeah, ultimately it's about that alignment with your public role. So realigning your spiritual calling with your career, I think that this is probably something that has already kind of been taking place for you. There is a last opportunity to take a look at this, and maybe especially as Neptune goes direct here again, so after like December 11th till about the 26th of January, there may be another little Neptune kind of putting the bow on the situation here to make more clear how it is that your career path has aligned for your spiritual development. And maybe this is more along the lines of philosophical development for you. But there's some kind of opportunity in that, that if it were just straightforwardly explained back when Neptune first entered, yeah, maybe that would have been nice, but you probably would not have learned as much along the path, basically. So Neptune is about to go into your 11th house, and this is with regard to friends, groups, social connections, groups that you identify with, as well as hopes, dreams, aspirations, things like this. So as it's moving from the 10th into the 11th, this is less a matter of achievement and ambition and more a matter of influence and the, not just the role that you have, like a title, but the role that you play in society and what it is that you're wanting for that to be and what Neptune is wanting for that to be for you. Usually there's something that we don't quite recognize in ourselves that maybe we just wouldn't imagine for ourselves. That usually by the end of a Neptune transit through a specific area in our charts winds up becoming quite clear because of all of the detours and things like this. So it's going to wind up encouraging you to lead. So maybe there was a winding path toward an authority position or something like this, or just standing more strongly in who you are and what's really aligned for you. That now that this is moving into the 11th is venturing more into the social. It's less about achievement. It's more about that influence, the wisdom that you are able to provide to other people, the connections that you're able to develop, the impact that you're able to have on people. And yeah, if I didn't mention it, just looking at how that probably career path, but again, just public reputation path, basically, that Neptune's been leading you down since 2011, looking back over that time, look at where the synchronicities played in, the serendipitous shifts and changes that you were not expecting. Looking at those and seeing kind of the flavor of that, or just kind of how that looks from the outside, that should also wind up helping you to recognize where the genuine Neptunian synchronicities and serendipitous opportunities and things like that are going to start showing up in those social groups and with regard to your dreams and ideals and things like that in the years to come. So I definitely recommend the review for that purpose as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. So I hope that you have landed in a position that you like in terms of your public role at this point. And maybe take some solace in the fact that this Neptune is now moving out of that angular house and things should start to settle in on that front now. So I would expect less surprises along those lines. It's more entering the social realm. So yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Neptune in Pisces spending its last bit of time in your 9th house. And the 9th house has to do with your worldview primarily. So this is your philosophy, your spiritual beliefs, your beliefs about the world and your role in it, as well as about all sorts of topics that kind of fall under the umbrella of humanities related topics. So legal things can show up here, culture and history and so on and so forth. It tends to fall in this place. Also publishing, travel, foreign places, things like this. Basically the expansion of your horizons of experience and of mind. So Neptune in this place should have been expanding that quite a bit. It is probably has led to spiritualize you a lot more and spiritualize your everyday life a lot more. it probably has led you down many different avenues of questioning different aspects of your beliefs. Hopefully has opened your mind quite a bit. But if you have been feeling like you're holding on a bit rigidly to some beliefs toward the end of this transit, like we've seen collectively with a lot of people, it may be worth just really intentionally opening yourself up to any sort of questioning of your beliefs that Neptune may want to do at this point to kind of close this out. So you should feel, though, like you've kind of settled into a sense of confidence and groundedness in your belief system at this point. And so looking back and reviewing the stories, the experiences, the little synchronicities, like serendipitous meetings with different people who wound up introducing new ideas to you, those books that you randomly found, those just random experiences that suddenly came into your realm and wound up shaping your worldview. Looking back at all of those weird little happenstance that winds up really impacting your philosophy and how those came through, I think can be really fruitful throughout this period of time. In particular, because of the fact that Neptune's about to enter your 10th house for good. And that can feel more consequential. It's more about your public role. For people who are following a traditional career path, it usually speaks directly to that and the role, the title, the position that you're in, basically. So making sure that you kind of understand the way that Neptune leads us synchronistically, I think is going to be really helpful for you in the coming 14 years or so that we have Neptune in your 10th. Now, this also hopefully winds up providing some sense of closure around where you may have been misled when it comes to your beliefs. So if there have been any false gurus, any people that you've really relied on because you believed what they were saying, and probably with good reason, or at least for a good reason, allowing for some forgiveness along those lines, I think, and really looking at it in that way of it was for good reason if you were misled when it comes to your beliefs for some time and didn't realize until later. So forgiving definitely yourself around that, then also forgiving potentially if there was a specific other person or people that did that. Maybe this is even speaking to a childhood philosophy or something like that. Maybe this is aspects of the culture that you live in that had you feeling a certain way about certain things or believing certain things that turned out not to be true. So forgiveness along those lines, if you possibly can, I think would be really helpful, again, before that moves into your 10th. Escapist fantasies may have also been something that wound up creeping in at times. So trying to create wonderful narratives, like stories in your mind. So relying for dissociation on things that really do wonderful things to the mind. So stories, music, movies, philosophy books, things like this that do get that thought that what are your horizons? What is your worldview? What is kind of just going on in the higher mind there? When that became stressful, it may have felt very comfortable to go into those places and exercise that part of your mind, but in a way that felt more comfortable because it wasn't directly dealing with maybe a big worldview question that you had, or some cognitive dissonance, or trying to hold space for someone that some part of you knew wasn't great for you. Something along these lines. The philosophies as well that can sometimes cater to that kind of passivity or escapism, things like this, overly idealizing certain things. And this is not at all an attack. I have had Neptune in my 9th house some years ago. It's actually just moving out of my 10th now. So I, definitely went through some of these things as well. It was in a different sign, but still. So yeah, I mean, getting some closure around that. If you have therefore wound up like building up guards around that and really not wanting to be influenced and being really careful about, for instance, the kinds of media that you consume and things like that, because you know about now the sensitivity of that higher mind. You know about how certain stories can create fear, so on and so forth, and all manner of things. That should not be happening as much. But again, looking back on that, as this is something that helped me to better understand where my boundaries are, where my mind is, and gain a sense of greater control over that, so that it's, especially with Saturn entering here as well, working on those boundaries and recognizing this is my mind and I should be able to call the shots as to what the energy is there. And yeah, also just hopefully you have found that, because all of those things that I was mentioning when it comes to personal truth, universal myth on the collective level is very relevant when we're dealing with the ninth house. So Neptune in Pisces in this place has probably been having those things that I mentioned around there being a broader range of belief that is available to us and that we can tap into, but then also recognizing that just because something's true for us doesn't mean that it's true for everyone. And just because there's a conventional truth doesn't mean that we need to live by that, these kinds of things. So how has that developed throughout this period of time as well? Reviewing that and then trying to be, like, again, as flexible as you can around that with yourself. I think the better to get the best kind of lessons out of this whole broader period of time. And yeah, like I said, this is moving toward ambitions. So it's calling for a sense of alignment along those lines when it comes to your worldly ambitions, your public role. And we'll start to lay out some interesting paths for you. Now, keeping in mind, similar to the way that it's been working on your worldview, it's not always an end game that it's showing you. Those synchronicities, those happenstance, like, holy hell, I had no idea that this awesome thing that I've been hoping for would suddenly be available. That might not be an end in itself. So I think that that's a little bit of a lesson that's good to take from our experiences with Neptune, is just to remember that yes, there's a destination in mind, and yes, there is expansion in mind, and yes, I do feel like it ultimately winds up playing out as a wonderful benefic on a very, very high level and gets us to where we want to go. But it's not always a linear A to B kind of a thing at all. So keeping that in mind when it comes to your professional ambitions for the coming 14 years or so, reviewing how that has played out, how you've seen that in this worldview area of your life, I think is going to be super helpful. Yeah, I think that that's pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. Do keep in mind, I did the Saturn-Neptune, both of them going retrograde together video. I'm pretty sure that I took that sign by sign as well. And then I did also do a video about Neptune and Aries. If you want to check those out and dig into this Neptune transit a little bit more, those should be in the description. But yeah, other than that, I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Neptune in Pisces in your 8th house. And your 8th house has to do with your connections to other people and where they can get a little bit more complicated, for better and worse. So this is where we share resources with others. This is where we're vulnerable with others. This is where we can have dependencies with others, whether they be healthy or unhealthy. This can be where we run into the matters and concerns and issues of other people as well. So their psychology, their emotional baggage, and how that winds up interacting with our own. This is also a pretty esoteric place, so it has to do with paranormal things, occult things as well can come through with this. So looking back on digging into reviewing any sort of illusions that you have encountered around resources or those entanglements that you've had with other people. Where did things get so complicated that maybe you needed to take a step back? Or where have things become so complicated that you or someone else really needed to step up to the plate for the other? Did you find that there was an issue with balance there? Was there any sort of resentment or things like that there? How did those moments of a kind of a crunch in a connection with someone else where things got a little bit heavier, how did that wind up playing out for you? I would imagine that it's been a bit of a mixed bag. That's usually the way that it goes with Neptune, is that it's going to show you some of one, some of another, and try to expand your range of experience basically that way, and expand what you view as possible, you know, because all of it is possible. Sometimes people can be absolutely wonderful. Sometimes they can be super toxic. And Neptune probably would have shown you both of those things, and probably in a specific order in order to get the strongest lesson out of it, frustratingly, you know. But the way that this would wind up kind of playing out with that would be that there would be matters of belief, matters of a sense of service or sacrifice, issues of fear, of loneliness, things like this that wind up playing into that. So how have those played out? What were the synchronicities along those lines? I kind of wonder sometimes after we have an experience, if we really look back and look at, okay, what were all of the little signs and things like that I was relying on with that? They're definitely there. It's not about questioning those, calling those into question, but getting to know how Neptune winds up leading us into specific kinds of paths. Because those paths during the past 14 years or plus for you would have been due to Neptune there. So reviewing also then those karmic ties, any sort of power plays, dependency in those close relationships, and what those lessons have been along those lines. I would also say, I did do a video on the Saturn Neptune in this place, but if since 2023, when Saturn joined Neptune in this house of yours, I would imagine that there's been things about boundaries, and that Saturn has come in, wagging its finger on that issue in particular, because this is very much a place where that shows up, and Neptune and Pisces can blur the heck out of those lines. And so if it wasn't a matter of by necessity, you already established those kinds of strong boundaries in that place, I'm sure that Saturn would have come through and helped to do that. And it's probably worth also kind of looking at that aspect of it too. So detachment now from a sense of merging out of necessity. So the 8th house can also be kind of where we feel a sense of lack, or where we feel like we're going to be completed by someone else, like other people have something, usually assurance for us, that we need, that for some reason we don't feel like if we provide that to ourselves that it will be enough, or that it will be worth it, or account basically for something. So that's where those dependencies and those issues of need and so forth can come through. But detaching from that need to merge with someone specific in a kind of specific way. So allowing for that to be a universal process, allowing for that to be a spiritual process, allowing for that to be that you know that the universe kind of has your back, you know that it will provide, and that you can provide as well for yourself what it is that you're going to need. And if there are healthy or wonderful connections that you happen to come across that happen to feel great on top of that, then wonderful. But not feeling that sense of a need to merge with something else in order to feel complete. Because I would imagine that there's also been some levels of disillusionment along those lines. And then, also detaching from the complications here. There can be a romanticization when we're dealing with Neptune, especially in Pisces. So, for instance, if there's been a kind of savior complex, or like a rescue or rescuee or a runner chaser, kind of like weird, they call them like karmic relationship patterns and things like this, that you have leaned into. Again, there's something to be gleaned from that. But it's not that that's useless. And I mean, sometimes it probably feels like it's not very useful, but Neptune comes through and it teaches us things. So we do learn through all of those experiences, but you don't need to hold on to that going forward. This energy is moving on now. So, and you're not going to have a big planet. You'll have like maybe one or two, I think, more eclipses in this area. But Pisces is about to quiet down for quite some time. So your eighth house is about to quiet down for a little while. So glamorizing those challenges and things like that, the things that we can do to make ourselves cope better with some kind of frustrating experiences, it's not going to be as necessary going forward. And so detaching from those things during this period of time, releasing them, I think is going to be really helpful for you too. And yeah, Neptune in Aries is going to feel a lot more lighthearted. It's moving more into the space of your higher mind, your worldview, and it's going to open you up to these more pleasant kinds of experiences, these universal, like connecting with people on a broader scale rather than these kind of intimate dependencies and things like that that can wind up playing out in the eighth. So looking at what you've learned about yourself and any sort of emotional baggage or hangups or how you may hold yourself back or how sometimes you may play a little bit small, things like this, all those lessons that Neptune's been bringing up, that's going to help you to release those self-limiting beliefs and things like this in order to feel really free to do the kinds of higher mind expansions and experience expansions that Neptune's going to want to bring in for you as it moves into that ninth house of yours. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Leo. Do keep in mind, I did do the Saturn-Neptune in retrograde video. I think I took that one through the signs. And I also did a video on Saturn or Neptune moving into Aries. So also feel free to check that out if you want to dig a little bit more into this kind of dance that Neptune's doing here. And that'll all be in the description if you want to do that. And other than that, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Neptune in Pisces in your seventh house. And this is speaking quite directly to close relationships and partnerships, other people as well. Tends more the close connections that we have. So I would say since 2011, with this alignment, there's probably been a lot of strange experiences with other people, especially those close ties. At times, you may have felt deceived or run down a path that turned out not to be what it looked like. There have probably been some absolutely wonderful, like very ideal, beautiful connections that you've had with people, kind of like spiritual partnerships that you've had with people as well throughout this period of time. Maybe meeting people or others that feel like soulmates to you and connecting with them really deeply. I mean, this could even be, pets and stuff like that. That's my closest soulmate, I really feel. And so reviewing this, looking back over this, over those experiences since 2011 that you've had in your close relationships and how the notion of partnership has developed for you. The notion of what it is that you expect from others versus what you put into relationships. Are you a little bit over self-sacrificing in connections? Do you expect from others less than you expect from yourself or vice versa? Things like this. So how has that changed since 2011? I'm sure a whole lot. There may have even been moments where you've recognized that you have projected either a scary or more likely a very wonderful image onto someone else that maybe did not quite deserve that. So looking that squarely in the eye as well. And really recognizing the benefits, all of the silver linings to the rain clouds that have come up with Neptune here, but also then just looking back on those serendipitous, synchronistic kinds of connections, which either they're still here for you, or if you have met certain people and they've introduced you to certain things, or they've led you on certain paths, they've caused you to grow in certain ways. Those were probably those serendipitous Neptune-like connections to just introduce something to you that Neptune wanted for you to see. It can show up in people when it's out in the seventh house there. So yeah, really grounded relationships, grounded partnerships, hopefully, is something that either through necessity with Neptune here, or again, you have had Saturn also in this house since 2023. Hopefully you have moved through enough idealized kind of foggier connections with people that you are at a place where you feel like you can really settle into when it comes to how you view partnerships and how you do them and so on and so forth. But if you don't quite feel like you're there yet, for one thing, Neptune's about to move on, but it's going to work on similar kinds of themes in the 8th house. I'll mention that in a moment. But you also have an opportunity with then this Neptune retrograde coming back into this house to address that, to try to ground that a little bit more. So I'm going to jump ahead here. Neptune in Aries, it's moving into your 8th house. This is where relationships can get a little bit more in depth, a little bit more complicated. There can be greater challenges. There can be entanglements and things like that that wind up coming through. But if you've been able to follow what Neptune was kind of putting down in your 7th house, you're able to understand the lessons around boundaries, around equal give and take, and so on and so forth, and partnerships, deservingness, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that you don't owe people something in order for them to just be in a connection with you, so on and so forth. I would imagine this is all played into that. The more that you are able to look at that, integrate that, review that, release those outdated, making you feel small beliefs when it comes to your connections with other people, there's no reason you should have to have a difficult and mirroring experience with Neptune going into your 8th as you have in the 7th. If you've learned those lessons, Neptune's not going to keep throwing them in your face. That's one thing I definitely want to get clear about with this Neptune transit that's coming up for you. So really calling on you then to forge those brave, honest commitments about what, like the kinds of commitments where you're very clear and you are definitely able to communicate under pretty much whatever circumstances around what your expectations are and what's actually going on. And there's not a need to have things unspoken, or to have guilt there, or to have these underlying kinds of experiences, which I would imagine that you have over the past years. Not to do that now. And so hopefully Neptune going into the 8th can introduce you to a sense of merging with others in a really healthy and beautiful, very romantic way, even in non-romantic partnerships and things like that. But again, it's really going to depend on how much did you integrate those lessons from Neptune in the 7th. So yeah, very much releasing those unspoken obligations based on illusions, based on guilt, based on gaslighting, things like that. Looking that square in the eye, saying, thank you for the lessons. I forgive you for my sake. And I am going to let go of those experiences. I'm not going to repeat those because I know what those red flags look like now. So I don't need to repeat those lessons. And I'm going to go and move on into not just connections because I feel that I need them, but connections because they feel like they are introducing another layer of depth to me, to my life, and things like this, So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. Do keep in mind, I did do the Saturn Neptune going retrograde through this area video. I'm pretty sure that I took that through sign by sign. And I also looked at Neptune in Aries. And so if you're wanting to dig a little bit more into any of that those two will be in the description if you're wanting to. But yeah, I hope this treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Neptune in Pisces has been in your 6th house. And the 6th house has to do with health and routines, your work ethic, the things that you get done, your activities, basically, habits, things like this. So with Neptune here, it would be excellent to look back and review stories that you've told yourself, narratives that you've held about your sense of service, being of service to others. That may have gotten out of balance at certain times throughout this since like 2011. as well as matters around your health. Maybe you have backburnered that at certain points and then it crops up and shows you like, hey, don't do that. That's very much Neptune then coming through as well. There may have been some confusion around that. There may have been some like frustrating, difficult to diagnose things that wound up coming up. The good news around this is that that should be lessening at this point in terms of not knowing what's going on there. You do have Pisces here, just generally speaking, in this house, but to not have Neptune here is a lot more helpful when it does come to a diagnosis. But what were the lessons around all of that as well? Did you maybe believe someone, an expert, maybe there's a lesson around that, believing an expert around something that you kind of subconsciously knew wasn't the case because it's your body and you kind of knew, things like this. So also then around being of service to others and perfectionism, where is it that you have held yourself to a really unrealistic kind of ideal of what it is that you should be doing? So when it comes to your routine, your habits and things like that, have you been super stringent along those lines? And then in turn, released completely, just like let that go and then become stringent. There can be a bit of an imbalance or being led down different paths just to look at those different factors, look at those different ways of doing things in order to provide the little things that you can carry from each of those different paths, basically, that are actually going to work for you in order to create a lifestyle that is functional for you. So one in which you're getting the things done that you need to get done. Things are organized in such a way that you're able to function. You're taking care of your health. And you also feel the sense of purpose or service within what it is that you're doing, but not letting that get out of hand such that you wind up getting burnt out, et cetera, et cetera. So showing you those different pieces, usually the way that Neptune does that, and this is one of the wonderful things to kind of look at and look for in those experiences that you've had, it'll pick up those pieces from totally different paths, and it will take you what looks like full on down a specific path just to pick up a little nugget there, and then it'll take you somewhere else completely to pick up another little lesson and pull them all together, certainly, to create a relatively more idealized lifestyle and life structure than you had in 2011 and prior. But again, it can get a little bit tiring when, especially in this area of like organization and routine and habits, to have a planet that is very much known for pulling you out of those things in that place. But yeah, when it comes to those issues of overwork, burnout, being that, helper that's, I'm just helping. This isn't for recognition. I don't need acknowledgement, things like this, where we can really give too much. We can wind up sacrificing ourselves way too much toward the sense of being a helper. And that can even wind up leaning into saviorism. And that may be, if that has at all been a role or something that you have seen in yourself, I hate to say, but this is a way that Libra rising can be inclined to go, is giving a lot. And so is there any sort of, if you wanted to be very sharp about it, I'll use some poignant words, is there any sort of a rescuer theme there? Is there a saviorism kind of a thing that goes on with your connections with other people sometimes? And maybe it's not to that extreme, but knowing that that's the thing for you before Neptune gets to your 7th house would be super good. It would help you out a lot to not wind up having Neptune then pull you down some paths that are really going to emphasize that to you and point out, hey, this needs to change. So the more that you can utilize the service aspect of the 6th house and the fact that Neptune has been drawing those things up and possibly pushing you too far with overwork and burnout and so on and so forth, not needing acknowledgement, just doing it for the cause or whatever, taking one for the team, whatever. Addressing that on this level will help a lot as that Neptune moves into the 7th. Also really reflecting on healing practices. So which have worked? Were you right? Were doctors right? There have been some experiences that I have had in recent years where I've been a little bit like kind of hard-headed about being pretty sure that doctors were wrong about things, and then it turned out they were right. And sometimes that happens, and maybe that was your experience. Maybe it wasn't the other way where there's a textbook diagnosis that doesn't really fit on the other side, but maybe there is a holding fast to a certain assumption internally, and then having a doctor or a diagnostician or whatever apply wisdom and experience to it, and where was the truth in that? What did work? What was the lesson underlying that as well? It's likely a lot of the lessons underlying all of those things that are a strong part of the reason why Neptune winds up having us have these weird little health things, especially the little blips and things like that. One of the things I was annoying about was not a blip. It's something I still have to deal with, but one of them was. So let's see here. So yeah, again, detaching from those savior roles or glamorizing that self-sacrifice. That is especially not just for the sixth house thing, not just for the sake of internalizing these lessons and doing your best at this transit, but really as a low-key me to you, you're going to want to have this nipped in the bud before that Neptune really goes into your seventh house much more. A little bit of a warning there for you. So really trying your best to detach yourself from those things and look at how they've played out, especially in your working life or just anywhere where you feel like you are generally of service to other people, where you felt burnout. That's probably going to be one of the best indicators, is that it would feel like physical, emotional, spiritual, mental burnout. When you do that, look back on those things, try to figure out what are the red flags, what are the clues, and take that into your closer partnerships as Neptune moves into Aries, because that will wind up calling for exploring deeper connections and a greater like emotional investment and spiritual investment in connections. So knowing what to look for when it comes to pitfalls and not needing those lessons would be a wonderful way to just have Neptune romanticize and idealize that place and have fewer lessons around people taking, But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So just a little reminder, I did do the Saturn-Neptune conjunction going across the sign barrier video. I'm pretty sure I took that through sign by sign. And then additionally, the Neptune in Aries video, I did take that one through sign by sign. So if you are wanting to dig into this a little bit more, look at it from different angles, that's in the description box below. But yeah, other than that, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Neptune in Pisces, retrograde in your fifth house. So this is speaking to matters of creativity, self-expression. This is a place of a lot of joy and pleasure. It's a really wonderful house. There can also be romance, romantic connections, as well as your connection with children around you, your own childlike nature. So that aspect of you that just able to kind of enjoy things, that has strong preferences, that loves to lean into hobbies and interests and things like this. So it's a very spirited place, and there can also be a lot of inspiration here. So having Neptune go through this place over the past 15 years or so, since 2011, I'm sure has had some really high highs, some really wonderful highlights to it. And yet there can still be those moments of disillusionment, which in this place would probably feel a lot more intense, a lot more emotional, basically. So reviewing, looking back on the creative kind of pleasure ideals, the focus of that spirited energy of yours since 2011, where has that been? Has there been any sort of new romantic connections that you've had? Have your romantic connections changed under this influence? I would imagine that they would be a bit more abstract, that they would be a bit less clear in nature. Again, really high highs, but also a lot of confusion within those kinds of connections. Also, children show up in this place. So if you have children, those connections also being a bit more ephemeral, a bit more etheric, a bit more confusing, but also, again, having those really wonderful highlights as well. Now, there could also be some interesting martyr dynamics that showed up, or over self-sacrificing, things like this, the saviorism and so forth, that can sometimes come through, certainly with Neptune and Pisces, having been going through this place for you in those kinds of connections. Also, even in terms of like those that you look up to when it comes to creativity, or when it comes to ideals and the things that you really love about life. So there may have been some illusions around genius, or around these figures that maybe you hold up as an inspiration or as a muse, and then being disillusioned or being disappointed by that which you're holding up on this really, really, really high level. So looking back also on those figures that you've kind of held up on high, and was it really reinforcing to you your own expression, your own creativity, your own spirit? Was it ultimately really inspiring in the long run? Or was there this pressure, or this feeling the need to emulate some kind of genius, or some fantasy basically along those lines, that turned out to have a lot less structure maybe than you were hoping, or than you thought would be the case initially? Also, when it comes to especially the romantic aspect of this, certainly, but this can wind up feeding into other kinds of high pleasure oriented connections. So soulmates, illusions around soulmates. Maybe there have been some connections which you would identify as being a soulmate connection, and then I don't usually use these terms, but some would say, okay, no, that was actually a karmic connection or something like that. This could even be, going into realms of twin flame connections, things like that, that wound up certainly leading you to a position where you learned a lot, but maybe did not get as much from that connection, or didn't have as pleasurable a time ultimately with that connection as, again, you may have expected initially. This could have also presented as really, really, really high hopes, or really exalted beliefs around your children. And some of that being maybe a bit inflated, or expecting some direction for that to go in, and then it didn't, all of these different things. So looking back on all of those experiences and what they ultimately wound up teaching you, but maybe not in the ways that you would expect, and therefore kind of identifying the Neptunian lesson, or the Neptunian kind of path that you were led along in order to learn those things. So really reflecting also on any dopamine habits, so that pleasure principle, on glamorizing things, on, I feel like I am so inconsistent when it comes to the word glamour. I think I've been inconsistent in this video. I'm pretty sure this is like the British way of spelling it there. But so also then any sort of dramas that wound up bubbling up, and just looking at, so even those kinds of, I don't want to say conflicts, but getting really worked up about something, getting really spirited about something, and maybe having some drama develop around certain issues here and there, being driven by, at times, that kind of dopamine and things like this. But then winding up learning more about, maybe there wasn't as much of a foundation to whatever that was. Maybe it wasn't actually as important as it seemed like it was in that moment. And reflecting on that, reflecting on what was really held on to because of some sense of dopamine, or dopaminergenic, I think is the word that we would use for that, connection or attachment to, again, some sort of a pleasure principle here. It could come through in a lot of different ways. Again, it may be a hobby. It could be a creative impulse. If you are an artist, this could be an attachment to being recognized or seen in some kind of a way, or really mastering a specific medium. This could be a genre that you got really into, like, this could definitely go super, like, obsessed about this kind of a genre or whatever, and then thinking that that's kind of the be all end all, and it winds up just pulling you into a different direction, which is just as significant, just as important. So looking at what it is that you were able to get from those things and what you thought that they were, that maybe they weren't. I would imagine that a lot of these things are actually more significant on a lot of levels, on a lot of more significant levels than they presented, but maybe less lighthearted. And it's that kind of lighthearted, wonderful aspect of it. This, again, this exaltation, holding things on high, this really strong identification with again, certain pleasure principles or things that you really enjoy, but then kind of needing to come back down to earth, but bringing something of that with you, bringing some of that kind of magic or inspiration with you on a more intrinsic level then, based on the lessons that are learned here. So also then creating some closure as Neptune is moving on out of this place around escapism through those pleasure principles. So art, expression, love, that lacks some kind of grounding. So really being able to identify what is the true substance in the things that I love and the preferences that I hold, and what it is that I'm kind of trying to create in my life or of my spirit through my life, through my expression and experience, and so on and so forth. Trying to figure out where is the substance in that, identifying that, looking back again, kind of through that. I would imagine there's a lot of lessons along those lines, and maybe also about the maybe ephemerality of certain pleasures that, or creative impulses that really require follow through. And that's something that Neptune can sometimes struggle with. Now, as it's then moving into Aries, it's moving into your 6th house, and this is where things get a lot more real. So this is where we take those pleasures that, what is it that we're wanting to see? What is it that we would love to see and interact with and do and activate, basically, create? How do we actually do that then? That's what's in the 6th house, is how do we create a routine around this? How do we round this into our everyday habits? So if you are, again, a creative type, or you have followed some inspired paths or something like this in recent years with Neptune here, and again, that may look like a wandering path. It may not just be one thing, and that is totally fine. That is what Neptune and Pisces would call for, is that it wouldn't just be one thing. It may build up into a greater whole, but you should be able to recognize many different threads that wound up weaving into what was created in this place. So that is now moving into the 6th house. You can create like a routine, a set of habits. You can pull this now more into your everyday life. And perhaps this is, for instance, Neptune drawing you across many different paths of, if you wanted to create a work habit, like a work out of pleasure. So taking a hobby and turning it into work or something like this. Now, keeping in mind that when we're dealing with Neptune, there's always going to be disillusionments along the way. So that may not wind up looking exactly like you would expect it to. I've done this a few times. Let me tell you. Yeah, once it's a job, once it's work, there's all sorts of other elements that go into it, and there does then require to be. It's fortunate, I think, for you that Saturn is tracing along Neptune's path as it's moving across this house barrier. If that's something you are at all interested in, is taking a passion and turning it into work. It won't look quite exactly the same, but just kind of continue to follow it. See where that winds up leading, and try not to get disheartened when this energy does get a little bit more serious in the 6th house there. But yeah, I think that's kind of a lot of what I would want to bring up for you here. Another little thing, a little thing that I would point out here. Again, Neptune in Pisces in the 5th house. This is so lovely, almost too lovely. So there can be, again, this holding things up on high, that really attaching your spirit to something, really like reaching for some idealized vision of life and passion and all of these kinds of good things. As that energy is pulled into your sixth, you may wind up going really over the top in some kind of a service orientation here of most this rejection of the individual pleasure principle, where there's this sweeping away temporarily, because believe me, you'll wind up coming back to the significance of your own experience of things. That would be what Neptune would be pointing out. But as it's moving into your sixth, this almost paper self-sacrifice. And I would just caution around that a little bit. I think you know what I'm getting at there of this, my pleasure doesn't matter. What matters is that I am of service. What matters is that I am serving the universe in my everyday life. That can become detrimental to yourself. I think that would be a lesson that Neptune would want to point out if you were to wind up following that thread into the sixth house there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So keeping in mind that I did do a video about Saturn and Neptune here together, and I think that I took that through the houses, and then I also did a video about Neptune in Aries, and I definitely took that through the houses. Those will be in the description if you're wanting to dive into this a little bit more. But yeah, other than all of that, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have Neptune in Pisces going retrograde back into your fourth house. So this house has to do with your home, family, your roots, your core self, especially your emotional roots and your sense of your background, your past, where you come from. And so there's an opportunity here to really review any sort of myths or narratives along these lines around what home means to you, what family means to you, and around any roles or things like this that come through with your family. So who it is that you are expected to be in your family versus, what your expectations of other family members are. Also, any sort of ideal family narratives that you may have. There may have been some disillusionment along the past several years since 2011 around, perhaps even whether you're being met halfway by family members. Maybe there was a difficult situation in your youth or in your family of origin that you really wanted to not repeat. And yet, like in a created family kind of a situation, and yet maybe there being some interesting kinds of lessons along those lines of creating a family and of how that's kind of an imperfect process, but hopefully having been able to review, having been able to look at a higher level at those kind of family patterns that may have been established, encourage you basically along those lines to do that differently at the very least, but also to not be too perfectionistic with yourself about that as well. So trying to strip away some of the illusions around home, around family, around roles, around any sort of conditioning that you wound up taking in from your family. And when it comes to your past and your background and any sort of narratives or stories, that myths that you've kind of told about who you are that may have kept you kind of stuck, Neptune should have been kind of pulling you along different paths in order to prove a lot of that to be untrue in its own funky and very indirect and sometimes kind of frustrating Neptunian ways of confronting us with certain aspects that we're overlooking or that we just can't see, that just aren't quite clear to us. It can wind up introducing us to that by just confronting us with a specific situation that we wind up being pulled into in our lives, almost magnetized into, in order to learn or experience this different way of being or this lesson about, in your case, something around inner child or upbringing or family or home roots, things like this. So you may have also been kind of unclear about your living situation or your home. There may have been people coming in and out. There may have been a need to be of major service to certain family members throughout this period of time, almost feeling like you were being completely self-sacrificing as well. And if that was the case, then Neptune moving into your fifth house is definitely going to be working on reminding you to take care of your own joy, to take care of yourself, and the pleasure principle of life also being very important, and not just feeling like you're here to be of service to other people too. But yeah, also this inner child stories, this is going to be really significant for when that Neptune winds up moving into the fifth. So the more that we can kind of release along those lines that have perhaps kept you passive or feeling helpless or feeling like you need to be a savior or feeling like you need to be saved, you know, these kinds of dynamics that can sometimes come from the family patterns that, you know, we are brought up in, releasing some of those stories that have kept you specifically either passive or dissociating or self-sacrificing or kind of being a martyr for other people. And maybe there have been people that you have taken responsibility for that aren't ultimately really your responsibility. And definitely some lessons along those lines where when you're looking back, try to really look at where did those lessons come in? They probably seem to come in kind of sideways, like that seemed to come out of nowhere, or that came in with all of these weird signs about, yes, go this direction, go this direction. And you thinking, okay, there's something wonderful in this direction for me. And then it feels like you were misled into a bad path, but you're not actually. It's that Neptune is trying to lead you to a recognition or an acknowledgement or a lesson or something like this that's going to serve you even better than the like candy basically that it was promising. Is it's dangling like all signs are pointing this way, definitely go this way, and we're like, yeah, okay, following my intuition, this is excellent, you know. And then we wind up in a situation which may not be as lighthearted but is definitely of more substance and more significance ultimately to us. So tapping into that kind of energy, reviewing that, looking back on that is going to help you, especially when it comes to the inner child stuff. There's going to be elements of that still in the fifth house. Also, if this is about created family, so if you have children, that element of this is also going to step into your fifth as well. Yeah, the expression of the inner child, rather than just healing it, allowing it now to come out and express itself and play basically in the world, is that Neptune goes into the fifth house. Recognizing, for one thing, the work, how far you've come, and how far Neptune has helped you along that line since 2011. That's all going to help you as Neptune moves into Aries as well. And so, yeah, being able to get some closure on generational patterns, recognition, clarity around those. I would imagine, especially since Saturn joined in to this house of yours in 2023, the things that become a lot more clear about those generational patterns, about maybe how, if there were certain things that came up with your parents, where those came from their parents, etc. You know, really being able to put yourself into all different shoes, but still not allowing for that to be an excuse to not have boundaries with family as well. And I would imagine that would be another lesson that has come through really strong since about 2023 as well. So yeah, this Neptune in Aries is going to really call you to open up, to then really boldly redefine your expression, your individuality, your kind of emancipation from those patterns of the past and of family, things like this. So again, being able to recognize and acknowledge the signposts that Neptune winds up creating for us, I think is going to be really helpful as you are starting to kind of extrovert this energy and be led in these more kind of openly expressive areas of life by Neptune as well now. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. So just a little reminder that I did do Saturn and Neptune going back into Pisces. I think I took that through sign by sign in a video. And then also I looked at Neptune in Aries, and I definitely took that through sign by sign. So I'll link to those in the description if you're wanting to dig into this more. But yeah, other than that, I just hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Capricorn, we have Neptune in Pisces going retrograde back into your third house. And this is the place of the people, places, things around you. So your community, your locality, matters of exchange, expression, communication, connection with others. We can see travel as an experience in this place as well, in addition to learning, the mind, opinions, knowledge, things like this, and extended family. So there's a lot of different aspects to this house that this could be working through. So feel free to extrapolate some of my words that I'll try not to be too redundant with onto any of these kinds of areas as well, but really reviewing your beliefs around these different areas of life. So there's likely been a lot of highs when it comes to this, and then disillusionments when it comes to this as well. So, in terms of your communication, of your knowledge, of learning, that may have been stirred up in really imaginative, wonderful ways where you were just able to run with something and dive deep into it in terms of like literary interests or genres. Music could also show up here. You've got Pisces in your third, so music may be a really big thing for you. But these kinds of imaginative forms of expression and knowledge and communication. So that, again, it may have had really high highs and then periods of disillusionment, periods of kind of frustration or a lack of clarity around how do I connect with this, maybe feeling less inspired, maybe learning certain things about the limits of communication, the limits of expression, the frustrations, the blockages. There could have been very confusing creative blockages, especially like writer's block, things like that that came up with this as well, that all seemed to have some kind of a lesson in it. Or if it didn't seem that way, Neptune basically without fail has some kind of a lesson embedded in it. And this period of time helping you then to review where that may have come in. So that on this more expressive level, but also your connection with community, that feeling really wonderful at times since 2011 and then being disillusioned, thinking of like COVID. Maybe in 2019, there were some really wonderful connections that you had. And for some reason, they seem to have just not been able to come back together in the same way, things like this. So reviewing that, maybe why didn't they come back together the same way? Feel free to look at the actual evidence of that and then think, and on this more imaginative or spiritual kind of level of Neptune around why that evidence may be what it was. On a logical level, like on a literal level, we can see the impacts of Neptune, but there's usually something behind it that is more meaningful that we usually don't tap into because it's like, okay, well, I have the evidence, I know why. But do we really? Do we know the underlying reason? Do we know the directional guidance, the kind of journey level reason that Neptune winds up working on in terms of that kind of level, right? So also, there may have been moments of a lot of mental fog. I definitely empathize with this kind of an alignment in terms of just like a lack of clarity with your thinking or how to express something. And that can be quite frustrating. Any sort of like wishful thinking or taking in a lot of different information, looking for clarity, but then it just becoming more and more muddled and not really knowing what of this can I anchor on, trying to solve that with more information and taking that all in, but then still not finding yourself on a sense of like solid ground in terms of maybe opinions or clarity around what's going on with something. So that mental clarity, for some reason, not coming through, regardless of how much information you're gathering. So there may be something there about tapping into that intuition about things, tapping into that kind of higher mind when it comes to these day-to-day things and these more mundane level kinds of matters of like what's going on in the world or whatever. That may have seemed really confusing. Like, why is this going on? The more that I dig into it, the more news stories that I read, the more confused that I get. And yet there may be a feeling level that you're able to get knowledge from that is that Neptune, which is this kind of instinctual understanding of where things are going or why they're playing out the way that they are. But again, when it comes to creating evidence around that, that's almost impossible. And you're also probably not really going to find that information in the, news stories and things like this that are playing out in the world, or when it comes to your day-to-day connections, not being able to have that kind of communication or evidence around maybe like why someone has entered your life, or why an opportunity or an experience, a workplace, a community, whatever, has come into your life. You may know on an instinctual level, but not be able to find the information around that, and therefore feel a little bit frustrated. I would say that when it comes to that taking that instinctual understanding and being comfortable with running with that would be probably a good way to go with this. The disillusionment with that seeking clarity, but it turning out to not offer that. So that false clarity, or the if I just do XYZ, then whatever it is going to come through in my everyday life. Maybe having some disillusionment around that as well, and needing to then look at what is the energy, what is the mental energy. Is there some sort of an attachment? Do you feel that you need for something to come through? Things like this. Why have things played out the way that they have? Again, on that everyday, day-to-day level, if you have felt like I'm trying to manifest this, this, and this, or I'm trying to follow through on this, this, and this, and there's just not clarity around it, and I just don't seem to see this come through, there's probably an energetic level on which something is just a bit out of alignment, and it may very well be that you think that there's something that you are needing or wanting, but it's not actually aligned to you. Like maybe there's something better. Maybe there's a level of detachment from that that's actually better for you and may bring that thing through. Sometimes that happens, certainly. But maybe it brings through something better when you're able to release, when you're able to detach from the needing for your day-to-day life to present itself basically in a specific kind of a way. Also, if you have been kind of carrying this Neptune in Pisces energy with you on a day-to-day level, so that kind of air of mystery, or really taking those mundane, local level, everyday level kinds of concerns and needing to find how they all fit into the picture. So that over intellectualization, there can be that idealization of mind in this place, or the idealization of kind of pulling back and not connecting with the like quote unquote lowest common denominator forms of community and things like this. There can be that refusing to allow for imperfection among human beings that maybe are available to connect to, or this sense of what's the point in connecting with that. Maybe you feel like it's better for me to spend time on my own. I'm not judging this at all. I totally do this at times. And just kind of connecting spiritually. And that's actually of more value to me. Now, there may have been, that may be perfect and wonderful and really good for you to have done, to kind of pull back from some connections, or to idealize what are the connections that you're really wanting, because maybe that needed to be lifted up from prior to this transit here. I'm hoping that that's making sense. I feel like, weirdly enough, when it comes to like actually verbalizing my ideas about Neptune in the third house, for some reason, the words, of course, the third house words are difficult to come through. But I think that you know what I mean, especially if Neptune is in your third house, basically transiting recently, of like, again, there can be this almost spiritualized or idealized kind of perfectionism or purification of your community ties, right? So that may have even been some of what COVID meant to you, of the day-to-day stuff that isn't actually of significance to you, clearing that away so that you have that time to redefine what it is that you actually want to be connecting to, what kinds of energies you want to have around you and be engaging with. But as that Neptune is moving on, it could be really excellent to try to reconnect a bit. It's likely that a lot of people have been thinking on this kind of higher level and may have some useful information for you as Neptune moves on, basically. And so as it does, it's going to be moving into your fourth house and speaking to exploring your own roots, digging into that, little journeys, little pathways along those lines of your core self, your family of origin, your conditioning, things like this from your past, your roots, your background, where you're coming from. And so, yeah, really opening yourself up to exploring self now rather than connecting very spiritually. It's more about releasing spiritually those areas of your roots and your core and so on and so forth that have maybe felt a little bit stuck. So yeah, looking back through this experience that you've had since 2011 along all of these different lines in your life, it should help you then to recognize those little Neptunian signposts, those little signs and synchronicities and serendipities that carry that Neptune signature for you as it's moving into your fourth house. But yeah, I did discuss the Saturn and Neptune going retrograde. I think I took that through the houses as well. I definitely took through the houses, the Neptune in Aries that we're coming into as well. And so if you're wanting to dig more into this, definitely feel free to check those out too. But other than that, I hope that this transit treats you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have Neptune and Pisces going retrograde back into your second house. And this house has to do with money and values, resources, kind of across the board. So in all ways, your values in terms of what you do value, your values in terms of what you believe in, your values in terms of what it is that you're bringing to the table, the value that you bring, your resources, as in, again, those material resources, but also the emotional and the intellectual and the skills and talents kinds of resources that you bring to bear in any given situation as well. And then money and finances from the perspective of kind of intellectualization around this and how you feel about that, but also on a literal level when it comes to income and earning and things like this, spending. So really an opportunity with this retrograde to review your beliefs about these things. So what are the narratives? What are the stories that you kind of tell yourself about your self-worth? I would imagine that you've been drawn down several different paths that have taught you things since 2011 about your self-worth, probably with the lesson being that you should value yourself more, that you should prioritize what your values are rather than what other people value, or rather than valuing other people and other connections and things like that, that you should prioritize your own part of that whole scenario. And then, yeah, also in terms of what you value, there may have been moments where you felt kind of confused along these lines. There may have been moments where you had these kinds of opportunities that felt like they were aligning you to certain values of yours or increasing your value in some way, only to be led down a path by Neptune that actually wound up teaching you something about value that was more substantive and less just about the thing in and of itself. It does work on this more ephemeral or etheric kind of spiritual level, which is about aligning us to certain things that are really correct and good for us. So also in terms of money, I would imagine as well that this has taught you certain things about where your priorities lie when it comes to income earning, as opposed to or hand in hand with your values. So is your means of earning in alignment with your principles and your convictions, basically, things like this. And sometimes that seems important. Sometimes it's not really important. Sometimes our money is just an end in and of itself. And it winds up reinforcing our values just because it allows for us to continue living our values in other aspects of our life. But sometimes it does wind up tying all together. So what have the lessons been along those lines? And where have the detours been along those lines to teach you lessons about your value, about your resources, what you bring to the table, and about money mindset things? So both extremes of that. Abundance mindset in the over exaltation, over idealization, the I don't need to do anything, the money just comes to me, these kind of money spells and things like this, that extreme. And then also the scarcity mindset kind of extreme. So hopefully Neptune has brought you to look at least to glance over each side of this. If it has, it's not trying to make you mad. It is trying to show you how to create some kind of balance between those things of, yes, I want to engage productively. I want to bring my resources to bear. I want to bring my intelligence and my understanding of how to utilize my resources in an intelligent way to bear. But I also don't want to get so rigid about it that I am not allowing for myself to have any sort of pleasure with regard to my resources because of some sort of fear around scarcity or something like this as well. So again, also looking back over that in this period of time, hopefully again, reinforcing the release of both of those extremes and coming into a sense of how faith in the unseen can impact your stability. So on different levels, that is meeting that sense of faith, spirit, the universe, God, whatever it is, halfway with shoring up your security and your stability, placing your faith in that, but also being willing to do the work yourself in order to work up the resources that you need in order to feel safe and secure, and so on and so forth. So not getting lost in the material worlds, but also not getting lost in the spiritual realm to the detriment of your material security, stability, and long-term as well. You know, setting yourself up as well as you can for the long term without falling into that scarcity kind of attitude. And then, yeah, also just these kinds of lessons around discerning between inner worth versus martyrdom. So how much of yourself do you really need to give in order to get however much you feel like you deserve versus what you actually need and want? So all of these different kinds of where are the priorities here? Is the priority just total self-sacrifice when it comes to your resources? I don't need anything, and anything that winds up coming my way, I'm just going to redirect it toward other people. That is saying something about how you value yourself, certainly. But also when it comes to the material resources and things like this, how do you align the expenditure of that, the exchange of that with your values as well? So maybe there has been a reprioritization basically along the lines of definitely making sure that you are serving yourself well enough to be taken care of, but also feeling aligned, feeling like your spiritual or principled nature is supported by your relationship with resources. And then also how much of yourself do you give away? How much of your resources do you redirect toward yourself now versus maybe you used to redirect a lot of your resources toward other people and toward trying to create a sense of assurance and stability and security outside of yourself, especially assurance about your value, looking to others to affirm that. This Neptune would have some things to say about that, and it would probably wind up leading you down an interesting kind of detour to confront that and to look at that. So looking at how all of these things have kind of developed and moved along since 2011, and also then trying to put yourself through all those steps. Were there any paths that were very serendipitous, that showed themselves up very like synchronistically to you with a lot of signs like, yes, come this way, this is going to be great. This is either going to make you a lot of money or you're going to feel super good about yourself if you just go this way. And then you wind up running into a kind of, again, confrontation with some aspect of yourself that is not really serving you. So again, maybe if I just give, then I will receive in the end back. And maybe there's an unfortunate lesson. This is the frustrating aspect of Neptune, where if it needs to, it will take us down that road and then not have a return come from the direction we were giving. It's kind of reminding me of this song. I think it was originally by Bjork, All Is Full of Love, but maybe not in the direction that you've been sending yours. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but then Neptune would wind up coming back around and making sure that you got what you needed, but it could definitely do so through a lesson kind of like that. So looking for those little weird detours and trying to figure out, okay, what are the signposts here? What are the markers of a Neptunian detour? Not so that you can avoid them, but so that you can know what it is that you're stepping off onto and know that there's going to be a more substantive kind of understanding or reward basically on that detour than even what you're looking for. But that you're probably going to find what you're looking for in a very different way than the way that it's presenting on the surface of it. So again, just kind of looking back since 2011 is going to help us a lot to identify how Neptune works, because it's so etheric, it's so ephemeral. It's really helpful to then look back on this and try to identify how it works so that hopefully sometimes more we can see how it's working as it moves forward. But yeah, that's going to be then moving into Aries and into your third house, which is going to take those values, take the self-value, the self-prioritization, as well as the resources that you bring to bear. And it's going to be moving into this area of expression and exchange. So how do you express your values and how do you exchange your value with others in an even-handed, reciprocal kind of way, basically, is what it's going to be speaking to. So yeah, I think that that's pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. I did do Saturn and Neptune both taking this trek backward from Aries back into Pisces one last time as a video. I think I took that through sign by sign, and I definitely took through sign by sign a video where I was looking at Neptune going into Aries now. So I will link both of those in the description in case you are interested in digging into this a little bit more. And other than that, I just hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. Okay, so for Pisces, we have Neptune in Pisces going retrograde back into your first house. So this is the house of yourself, your self-image, how you approach things, how people see you, how you see yourself, how you carry yourself. It is very much your body and your personality, basically. So this is giving you an opportunity to look back over how that has developed and how those lessons that have changed you over the past 14 or so years since 2011, how that has developed. So your concept as well as your mythos. So who are you? How do you carry yourself? What do you feel like you're here to do? What are you motivated around? What are the kind of identity markers that you wind up attaching to? And how have you wound up releasing some of those, as I'm sure that you have over the past several years with Neptune coming through here. So looking at the weird kind of serendipitous, synchronistic opportunities and paths that have availed themselves to you over the past several years, how have they approached? How have you run into those most significant detours that wound up teaching you really wonderful lessons about yourself, but probably not exactly the lessons that you were expecting to learn? That's where that Neptune is coming through. So looking back on all those experiences, tapping into those, making sure that you're checking in on what the lessons were and what was valuable that came out of that for you, how that wound up helping to reframe your sense of identity as well. Also then helping with this retrograde coming back into Pisces here. This does help with any sort of residues that still need to be worked through there, releasing any sort of illusionary self-images. Again, I'm sure that you've done a lot of this, but there's just this last opportunity to review, release anything that is illusionary, anything that doesn't really feel true to you internally. This is an instinctual kind of etheric energy that's being worked with. So how you feel about certain things is going to be much more important than what the evidence actually says about things. Now, Neptune will create evidence as it goes, but it doesn't function on that basis. So any sort of personas or anything you can recognize as a mask that you wear, really looking at that, trying to release those illusions in order to more fully embrace who you are, because Neptune has made that really a lot more wonderful probably as well since 2011. You probably feel about yourself a lot more aligned, a lot more like who you are is who you want to be. And so the masks, the personas, the self images that we can project at times in order to protect that, because of the fact that also this Neptune in Pisces has been pointing out to you your sensitivities and things like this, that can pull us away from ourselves at times. So are you able to kind of stand in your own personality, stand in your own self and your own identity without those? If those are not helping you, try your best to release. Now, flip side, to overcomplicate this, yeah, I'm sure there's been a lot of really significant lessons and messages around boundaries. If you have Pisces strong in your chart, that's always something that you need to work on. And Neptune in this place is probably going to have dissolved those to the max, such that you wound up encountering some things where you were like, okay, holy heck, I need some stronger boundaries. So let's do that by necessity. And then Saturn coming through since 2023 has probably just been straightforwardly encouraging stronger boundaries and things like this to actually erect some clarity around where you end and others begin and vice versa, and etc. So overgiving could have also been a major thing. And again, recognizing what's your responsibility and what's not. I think that that's going to be a big thing for you that could be really interesting. That's been a thing for me. I have my sun in Pisces. It's kind of later in the sign. And so the Saturn Neptune kind of coming together around this area has definitely pointed out some things around like that's not your responsibility. And it's been kind of mind-blowing. I don't know if you've experienced similar things recently, but that's definitely something that those two together especially would be pointing out. So internalizing those lessons, I think, is going to be really significant and especially helpful to strong Pisces energy, basically. Also, then this kind of closure on feeling like you are living out a persona, an archetype. So being something rather than being you. So filling a role for yourself, for others. And maybe this is one of the things that Neptune can do that's fascinating. I'll give you a specific example that may resonate on this kind of archetype. Is it could have had you take up an archetype as a persona, as an identity, in order to tap you into something that you value strongly and that you can see the value in, because it's something that on some level is outside of yourself, and attach to that and live through that and build up your own self-esteem, your own self-image through living through that archetype. But at this point, with Neptune coming back in retrograde, look at that. If that's something that you still do in a self-protective kind of a way or a self-building kind of a way, and then allow for that to kind of move along so that you don't feel like you're caged in by an archetype, which can definitely be something that winds up playing out from that place too. So that Neptunian lesson would be around valuing yourself, but it would do it in a way that is helpful, but isn't the destination. It's just a detour to get you to where it's wanting you to go, which is, again, self-confidence, etc., strong identity, etc. But through that detour, through that weird evidence-less, kind of pathway, that once you're on the other side of it, it makes sense. But when you're on that road, it looks like, no, I'm just really leaning into this archetype, this role, because it's helping me out for now, So really integrating everything that you've absorbed since 2011. This has been a really significant transit for you, unless we wind up with perfect longevity, breakthroughs. It's going to be the only one. So it's moving on for good now. And there are pros and cons to that. It is a lovely kind of an influence. It is ultimately quite protective, but it will pull you into some really intense experiences at times if it's trying to drive a point and it really feels like it needs to. Usually that's going to be something that you're resisting, and the lesson is probably in that resistance as well. So really integrating, reviewing, getting some closure, releasing. I know I've said these words a lot recently, but we have these retrogrades that are really significant, that are crossing sign barriers. This is what this whole period of time is really about. So the more that you can do that, and especially on a personal identity level for you, I think the better. And that's going to set you up really well for when Neptune moves into Aries, and it's moving that focus to what you truly value and aligning yourself and realigning your resources, which Neptune should have been building up gently and weirdly, very eccentrically, since 2011. Now is then, as it moves into your second house, the time to kind of act upon that, which is to, again, align your values and your resources. So what is it that you bring to the table? You probably have a clearer view of that now that Neptune's built you up. It's now going to wind up building up and reinforcing your resources, and then requesting that you align your values with that, and that you apply your resources and earn and build your resources in alignment with the values that you're now carrying too. But yeah, other than that, I will just say I did look at Saturn and Neptune together going back into Pisces. If you want to check that out, I think I took that through sign by sign as well. I definitely took Neptune going into Aries through sign by sign. I'll link to those in the description if you're wanting to look into this a little bit more. But yeah, other than that, I hope that this really beautiful transit wraps up in a wonderful way for you. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.